Your child didn't yell, they didn't argue, they simply ignored you, and in that silence, something inside you cracked. What if the real danger isn't their disrespect, but what it slowly turns you into when no one is watching? The moment that changed everything didn't come with yelling or chaos. It came with something far more unsettling: silence. I asked my child to do something ordinary, not urgent, not important. They were right there, close enough to hear me breathe. But they didn't respond. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Kids get distracted. So I asked again. Still nothing. And that's when the feeling hit. Not anger at first, but something colder. A sudden sense of being dismissed, of not mattering, of standing in my own home and realizing that my words no longer carried weight. In that quiet moment, my mind filled in the gaps. They're ignoring you. They don't respect you. You're losing control. Almost without thinking, I reached for the tool I'd inherited without ever questioning it. Authority sharpened by irritation. My voice tightened, my tone changed. I didn't just want a response anymore, I wanted to reestablish my place. But the reaction I got wasn't compliance. It was withdrawal. My child didn't argue, didn't push back. They simply disappeared emotionally, eyes elsewhere, body closed, as if something invisible had just shut between us. That was the shock. Not the lack of obedience, but the distance that followed my anger. Standing there, I felt a question rise that I had avoided for years. What if the problem isn't that children don't respect us, but that we've been taught to mistake fear for respect? I wasn't trying to be harsh. I was trying to be effective. Yet the harder I pressed, the less connected we became. That was the moment I understood this couldn't be solved by louder words or tighter control. Because if every small moment turned into a power struggle, the ending was already written, and it wasn't closeness. I didn't know the solution yet. I only knew this. Whatever I was doing, it wasn't leading where I thought it was. That moment stayed with me, not because of what my child did, but because of what it forced me to see about myself. For a long time, I believed calm was something you used after respect was established, not before. I had absorbed the idea, quietly, almost invisibly, that authority had to be felt, that if children didn't sense a certain edge in your voice, they wouldn't take you seriously. Anger, in that way, felt useful. It felt like a switch I could flip to regain control when things started slipping. But the more I paid attention, the more I noticed something unsettling. Anger worked only on the surface, and only for a moment. What it really created wasn't understanding, but compliance mixed with tension. I began to realize that my reactions weren't coming from strength. They were coming from fear. Fear of losing relevance. Fear of being ignored. Fear of not knowing how to lead without force. Staying calm, on the other hand, felt risky. When I didn't raise my voice, a part of me worried that I was sending the wrong message, that I was letting things slide, that I was giving something up. But calm wasn't absence. It was presence without panic. I started noticing how my body reacted before my words did. The tightening chest, the shallow breath, the urge to respond quickly, decisively, as if speed itself equaled leadership. And every time I gave in to that impulse, the conversation collapsed. What slowly changed my perspective was understanding how children experience these moments. When emotions spike, their nervous systems don't open. They protect. They don't hear meaning. They register threat. In those moments, no lesson lands, no value transfers. Calm didn't weaken my role. It clarified it. It allowed me to think instead of react, to lead instead of dominate. And perhaps most importantly, it showed my child something I had never been taught myself, that strength doesn't have to be loud to be real. Once I understood that calm wasn't weakness, but a different kind of strength, I had to face a harder question. What does that strength actually look like in real moments, when emotions are already rising and nothing feels theoretical anymore? The first shift was learning to pause before I reacted. This sounds simple, almost too simple, but it was the most difficult change I made. Every instinct in me wanted to respond immediately, as if speed would prove authority. Instead, I began stopping, sometimes just for a breath, sometimes for a few seconds longer. That pause didn't make the situation disappear, but it changed me. It created space between the trigger and my response, and in that space, I could choose not to escalate. I wasn't ignoring the behavior. I was refusing to let impulse lead the interaction. From there, I learned to look beneath the behavior instead of colliding with it head on. When my child ignored me or spoke with attitude, I stopped asking, "How do I shut this down?" and started asking, "What's happening underneath this?" Stress, insecurity, exhaustion, none of those excuse disrespect, but they explain it. And understanding doesn't mean surrendering authority. It means responding to the cause, not just the symptom. When my child sensed I was trying to understand rather than overpower, defensiveness softened and conversation became possible. The next shift was setting boundaries calmly, without emotional charge. I used to believe consequences only worked if they were delivered with intensity. But intensity wasn't clarity, it was noise. I began stating expectations plainly and consistently, explaining what was acceptable and what wasn't, and what would happen if boundaries were crossed. No threats, no raised voice, just steadiness. Over time, I noticed something surprising. Calm boundaries carried more weight than angry ones ever did. They felt predictable, and predictability created safety. Then came the most confronting shift of all, becoming the example I was asking my child to follow. I had to face moments where I demanded respect while interrupting, demanded listening while half listening myself. Children absorb behavior far more deeply than words. When I slowed my speech, regulated my tone, and showed respect even during disagreement, I saw that reflected back, not immediately, but steadily. This wasn't about perfection. It was about alignment. Another realization followed naturally. Respect doesn't grow during conflict. It grows in moments where nothing is being corrected. I began creating time with my child that wasn't about discipline or instruction, just presence. Shared activities, quiet conversations, attention without agenda. These moments didn't erase conflict, but they changed its tone. When connection is strong, friction doesn't turn into rupture as easily. Finally, I learned to let time do some of the work. After addressing an issue, I stopped pushing for instant change. I gave space, not as avoidance, but as trust. Reflection can't be forced, it has to be allowed. When I stopped demanding immediate understanding, my child began arriving at it on their own. That kind of awareness lasts longer than anything imposed. None of these shifts felt dramatic while I was living them, but together, they changed the direction of our relationship. Not by controlling behavior, but by transforming the emotional climate where that behavior was growing. As these changes slowly took hold, I began to notice that the real transformation wasn't coming only from how I handled difficult moments, but from what I chose to do in the quiet spaces around them. One of the hardest lessons was learning that not every act of resistance deserved my full attention. I had spent years treating every small challenge as something that needed to be corrected immediately, as if letting anything pass meant losing ground. Over time, I saw how exhausting that was for both of us. Some behaviors weren't signs of disrespect at all. They were signs of growth, testing, or simple fatigue. Learning to step back and ask, "Does this truly matter in the long run?" gave me back clarity and patience. Another shift came when I started inviting my child into decisions that affected them. Not handing over control, but offering a voice. Something changed when they felt included rather than managed. Responsibility didn't have to be forced. It could be shared. And with that sense of ownership came a quieter, more natural respect. I also realized how much my attention had been skewed toward what wasn't working. I was quick to correct, slow to acknowledge progress. When I began noticing effort instead of only outcomes, the atmosphere softened. A simple recognition carried more influence than repeated reminders ever had. Perhaps the most humbling moment was learning to apologize. Admitting that I had overreacted didn't weaken my role, it humanized it. It showed my child that growth doesn't end with authority, and that accountability applies to everyone. These choices didn't create instant harmony, but they shifted the relationship from constant correction toward mutual understanding. And that shift changed everything that followed. Looking back, it became clear that none of these changes were really about fixing behavior in the moment, but about shaping the kind of relationship we were growing over time. I used to think respect was something you demanded when things went wrong. Now I see it as something that forms quietly, in the way a child feels around you day after day. It lives in emotional safety, in consistency, in the sense that guidance doesn't come with humiliation or fear attached to it. When I stopped raising my voice, I didn't lose authority the way I once feared. I gained credibility. Calm became a signal of leadership rather than indifference. And emotional intelligence stopped being an abstract idea and became something my child could experience directly through me. This approach didn't eliminate tension or disagreement. Those are part of growing up and part of being human. But it changed what tension led to. Instead of distance, it created reflection. Instead of resistance, it allowed awareness. What surprised me most is how much this journey reshaped me as well. In learning to lead with calm and connection, I wasn't just guiding my child toward respect. I was learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to embody it myself. When I step back and look at the whole journey, one thing becomes unmistakably clear. Moments of disrespect are rarely the real problem. They are signals. Signals that something inside the relationship needs attention, not domination. I once believed that being firm meant being loud, and that being respected meant being feared, at least a little. But what I learned instead is that fear creates compliance, while calm creates trust. And trust is what shapes behavior when no one is watching. The deeper lesson here is this: the way we respond under pressure teaches far more than the words we choose. In everyday life, this doesn't apply only to parenting. It applies to our relationships, our work, and even how we treat ourselves. When tension appears, pause before reacting. Lead with clarity instead of impulse. Build connection before demanding change. Over time, people don't follow the loudest voice, they follow the most grounded presence. I'm curious to hear from you. When you feel ignored or disrespected, do you tend to react immediately, or do you pause first? Please share your thoughts in the comments so we can all learn from each other. And if this reflection resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps keep these conversations going.